9:17 p.m. Belbek Airport, Crimea. Under the glare of high-intensity floodlights, a MiG-31 BM fighter jet sat proudly splayed open right on the tarmac. Its left engine had been stripped apart for a maintenance procedure expected to last 72 hours, a juicy schedule that had been sitting comfortably on the desk of Ukraine's Alpha Special Operations Unit for 3 full weeks. Pulling their gaze away from the Belbek runway and casting it down toward the ink-black waters of Sevastopol Bay, 3 fat ducks were also sitting obediently at anchor, waiting for the slaughterhouse. They were the Yamal Project, 775, a 370-foot behemoth capable of carrying 500 amphibious troops. Beside it sat the old warhorse Nikolai Filchenkov, Project 1171, a Cold War relic, and most prized of all, the star of the fleet, Ivan Kure's Project 18280. Tonight these targets sat squarely at the top of Alpha Center's shopping list. It sounds insane on its face because Crimea is by any measure an impregnable steel fortress second only to Moscow. You simply cannot stroll into an armored zone locked down that tight, unless you intend to pay the bill with a firestorm. At exactly 9:30 p.m., the skies over the Black Sea were torn apart by the shriek of 71 drones barreling toward Crimea at hundreds of miles per hour. This encircling swarm converging from every direction was a lethally ironic mix of Force's cheap plywood frame AQ-400 scythe decoys flying wing to wing with AN-196 Lyuti stealth ghosts, each carrying hundreds of pounds of explosives ready to rip their prey apart. This was no quick-hit, small-scale raid. It was a colossal wave with drone swarms pouring in from every angle north through the Kerch Strait, down from the northwest across the vast steppe, and pressing in from the west across the still surface of the sea. While these mindless killing machines were burning every last joule of energy to close the distance, back at the Alpha Center in Kyiv, intelligence analysts were calmly sipping black coffee. Everything had been laid out 3 weeks earlier through NATO's satellite network. They had tracked the berthing schedules of the 3 warships in Sevastopol Bay as obsessively as American submarines track every move of the Chinese fleet prowling the Taiwan Strait, with a particular hunger for the Ivan Kure's, whose electromagnetic signature blazed like a Christmas tree across every radio frequency the moment it activated its reconnaissance systems. Even the MiG-31 BM, sitting obediently under the floodlights at Belbek, had long since been entered into the Black Book. The Alpha unit had been tailing it all the way from Khabarovsk Air Base in the Russian Far East, patiently tracking its continent-crossing journey like cold-blooded hunters waiting for expensive prey to walk into the trap on its own. At exactly 9:31 p.m., the first massive explosion officially tore through the nighttime silence over the Kacha airfield, and barely 3 minutes later, waves of brilliant fire continued erupting at Belbek Air Base and the Violent Cape area to the south. Russia's entire air defense network across the Crimean Peninsula was rudely, violently awakened. Imagine the night sky at that moment as a real-life blood-soaked video game. The radar screens of the S-400 and Panzer S-1 systems were suddenly choked with dozens of blazing red dots hurtling in at hundreds of miles per hour. The skies over Crimea instantly boiled with chaos. Russian radar crews screamed frantic warnings. Intercept rounds weighing thousands of pounds tore through the air, slashing the night with crisscrossing streaks of fire like a web of death, mingling with the ear-splitting roar of 30mm autocannons firing blindly into the sky, lighting up entire swaths of the horizon. Ukraine had hurled into this cauldron a cocktail of maximum lethality. Dozens of cheap plywood AQ-400 scythe decoys flew in dense, sluggish clusters, drifting across the sky like a flock of deaf crows drawing down the fire. Inside the sweat-reeking confines of a Panzer S-1 vehicle guarding the Belbek perimeter, the Russian crew was working at a frantic pace. Their radar screen flickered relentlessly. Costly intercept missiles shredded the night sky one after another, pulverizing the plywood drones into cascading showers of burning sawdust. Amid that tangle of signals, the radar of Panzer No. 1 suddenly snagged on tiny, fast-moving return signatures zipping along at hundreds of miles per hour. Not plywood, these were AN-196 Lyuti stealth ghosts threading through gaps in the wall of fire. The vehicle commander screamed himself hoarse. The 30mm autocannon erupted in a thunderous, deafening burst, shredding the sky. The rounds found their mark. 2 Lyutis blew apart in midair, scattering carbon fragments drifting like ash down to the earth. The crew erupted in triumph. Shooting down the enemy's premium hardware is always a heavy-duty adrenaline shot. They leaned into it, hammering the trigger again and again, raking the skies with fire, convinced they were warrior gods commanding the night. But arrogance on the battlefield has always walked hand in hand with death. What they didn't know was that the sacrifice of those two Liutis had been a coldly deliberate tactical trap called ammunition exhaustion. The moment the cheering hadn't even finished, the alarm screamed inside the cabin. All 12 missile tubes were completely empty. The crew's shirts were soaked through with cold sweat, but survival instinct kept them from folding. The commander bellowed the order to switch to secondary weapons. Instantly, the two 30mm autocannons on the flank swung up and roared to life, spitting out a dense wall of fire at a terrifying rate of 5,000 rounds per minute. The hull shuddered violently. Shell casings rained down, clattering onto the asphalt. A few more plywood drones were ripped apart, burning fragments fluttering down to the ground. The crew seemed to lose themselves entirely. Teeth clenched, trigger fingers locked, determined to sweep every ghost off the radar screen. But this was exactly when cold, unyielding physics came knocking. The Panzer's cannon magazine, however large, holds a maximum of roughly 1,400 rounds. At that insane rate of fire, like opening a fire hose, a crew in full-blown panic can burn through the entire ammunition store in fewer than 20 continuous seconds of trigger pulling. The deafening roar that had been shredding eardrums went abruptly dead silent, replaced by a dry clack, clack, echoing from the gunman. The 430mm barrels were glowing red hot like embers trailing acrid smoke, but the magazine was bone dry. That was precisely the fatal window, the most helpless dead zone that Ukraine's intelligence apparatus had calculated well in advance. A third Liuti, which had been patiently loitering, waiting for its prey to exhaust every last missile and every final cannon round, now made its move. The stealth assassin dove at wind-shearing speed, drilling straight into the windscreen in a tenth of a second, before hundreds of pounds of RDX detonated and turned the tens of millions of dollars interceptor into a massive torch of twisted metal blazing in the dark. The whack-a-mole game was over, and this time the mole had waited for the player to break the hammer before lunging out to bite through the jugular. While the skies over Crimea still blazed with gunfire and explosions hundreds of miles away, deep inside a secure bunker beneath Kiev Alpha's intelligence specialists were unhurriedly sipping their black coffee. They were calmly absorbing the enormous torrent of electronic data pouring back from those very kamikaze drones to build a kill map which units responded fastest where the radar blind spots were and which corridors were fumbling and leaking. This art of reconnaissance by bomb sounds like burning money, hurling millions of dollars out the window. But in reality, it strips bare the entire tactical picture, exposing every vulnerability of the adversary right before the finishing blow. And then, as the last pieces of smoldering plywood finally hit the ground, a chilling silence began to descend over Russia's anti-air positions. At precisely that deceptively quiet moment, Sevastopol Governor Mikhail Razvozhayev rushed to social media. He practically danced as he posted a triumphant announcement. Their magnificent defensive wall of fire had just obliterated all 71 Ukrainian drones, and that the entire Crimean peninsula was now bathed in absolute safety. A fatal pride, because the governor had no idea that his own chest-thumping victory announcement had become the most merciless starting pistol of the night. It confirmed to Kiev that the enemy had walked straight into the trap, had exhausted themselves, and was drowning in complacency. The vault door was open, and Ukraine officially unleashed the second strike wave, one carrying unstoppable destructive force. This time, everything would unfold according to a completely different and ruthless script, because there were no longer any chaotic decoys or random plywood drones flying aimlessly. Every single attack drone now carried a specific set of destruction coordinates pre-programmed with surgical precision. At exactly 3:32 a.m., the second wave split the air like a scalpel, driving straight into the lungs of Russia's air defense network, the MIS-M1 early warning radar station. There was no theatrical circling or telegraphing approach. The Liuti stealth ghosts, each carrying hundreds of pounds of RDX, deliberately dropped to treetop height to punch beneath the radar horizon. The instant they pierced the electronic barrier, they yanked up their noses and drove directly into the center of the massive rotating antenna dish scanning the Black Sea. Blinding kinetic explosion erupted, melting tons of steel and fiberglass into a cloud of acrid, smoldering ash, and officially gouging out the most powerful, far-seeing eye of the fleet. The tactical logic here is as merciless as a law of physics, exactly the same method the Pentagon once used to strangle Cuba's missile sites during the Cold War. Once the outermost eye is blinded, the reaction time for every target further inland instantly collapses to zero. But the cascade collapse of Russia's air defense network only revealed its bloodiest face 12 seconds later when the next wave of Lyutias struck directly above the roof of the Radio Electronic Intelligence headquarters. There was no need to drill through the reinforced concrete buried dozens of feet underground. The stealth UAVs aimed instead at soft but mission-critical targets, the massive communications antenna clusters, signal towers, and backup power generation systems sitting exposed on the surface. The blast from hundreds of pounds of RDX blew away the entire communications umbilical cord of the bunker, shredding fiber optic cable bundles and obliterating circuit arrays, causing the single worst catastrophe for any modern defense network: total tactical data link failure. At that point, even though the Russian command crews sitting deep underground were physically unharmed, their coordinating brain had officially suffered clinical death. The communications blackout meant that S-400 and Panzer vehicles on the surface, despite still sitting on thousands of pounds of ammunition, were suddenly transformed into isolated blind and mute islands. They lost all ability to share targeting coordinates or receive cross-assignment intercept orders from the command center, leaving the short-range fire control radars with nothing to do but tilt their faces up at the sky and sweep in hopeless, panicked circles. In a desperate last-ditch counterattack attempt, the moment the fire control radar of Panzer No. 2 at Belbek Air Base detected the explosion at Mice M1 and the frantic operator swung the 30mm turret to the left, to intercept exactly 15 seconds later, another Lyuchi sliced down through the clouds from the blind spot on the right flank. The hydraulic drive of the Panzer screamed in protest, but physics doesn't lie. A steel mass weighing several tons cannot swing its barrel fast enough to track a stealth bomb diving at hundreds of miles per hour before it turned the vehicle into a towering torch. And at the precise death moment, when every gun barrel, every radar beam, and every ounce of attention from the shore-based air defenses was angled skyward at a burning sky from the pitch-black surface of the sea, a wolf pack of Magura 5.5 naval drones materialized. Each carrying over 700 pounds of RDX, they sliced silently through the water at nearly 50 miles per hour, nosing straight towards Sevastopol Bay. The night watch crews aboard the massive Yamaland, the reconnaissance vessel Ivan Kursk, scrambled frantically, unleashing ear-splitting alarm horns as surface radar picked up the white foam wakes closing in at only a few thousand feet out. The six-barrel AK-630 close-in weapon systems on deck erupted, immediately spitting armor-piercing rounds at thousands of rounds per minute, churning the water's surface into a boiling cauldron of fire in a desperate attempt to weave a steel curtain to stop the mechanical sea wolves. Two Magura 5.5s were caught stumbling into the fire and blew apart into towering columns of steaming, acrid water. The Russian sailors roared with excitement, convinced their firepower had the situation under control. But those unlucky Russian crewmen had absolutely no idea they had been drawn into a brutally suffocating combined assault. At the very moment the mechanical gun systems aboard ship were forced to angle their barrels down toward the waterline to track the erratic paths of the suicide boats from the dark vault of the sky above the Lyuchi stealth UAVs that had been lazily circling and waiting plunged straight down, shredding the command bridges and radar towers, clearing a clean path for the Magura 5.5s below to cross the final few hundred feet of lethal open water. At 3:35 a.m., the wolf pack of Magura 5.5s mercilessly drove their enormous charges of RDX straight into the waterlines of the Yamal, the old veteran Nikolai Filchenkov, and the intelligent ship Ivan Kursk in succession. The earth-shaking blasts tore through thick steel plating, turning the giants that had formed the backbone of the Black Sea Fleet's amphibious capability into roaring, blazing funeral pyres. Let it be stated plainly, every time these behemoths lie still on the floor of the harbor, it is a day of brilliant celebration for the coastal defense forces in cities like Kherson and Odessa. One could argue that the most pivotal and most bitterly ironic strike of the night bore the name Ivan Kursk. Unlike armored warships bristling with cannons and tubes, this vessel worth hundreds of millions of dollars carried no missiles and no guns. Its most dangerous weapon was knowledge. For months on end, its enormous antenna arrays had continuously vacuumed up every radio frequency, every communication signal, and every electronic signature from Ukraine's entire drone fleet. When the flames consumed the Evenkures command bridge, the Alpha Force didn't merely sink a hunk of metal, they permanently erased a colossal database. At the same moment at Belbek Air Base, when the alarms finally wailed too late, the massive MiG-31BM was still lying naked at its exact same spot on the tarmac. It never received the scramble order because the early warning radar system was blind and the commands from the underground command center had gone mute. A Luti stealth assassin calmly circled, spotted the unlucky prey, lined up its angle, and drove an armor-piercing warhead directly into the aircraft's wing fuel cell. Approximately 22,000 pounds of aviation fuel ignited instantly, producing a fireball so massive and brilliant that residents in the distant village of Belbek, miles away, could see it clearly with the naked eye. When the dawn light of April 27th finally broke through, dispersing the acrid gunpowder-reeking haze, a brutal reality materialized on the analysts' ledger sheets. One MiG-31BM, reduced to scrap metal, equaled $50 million in ash, plus an operational gap stretching a full year while waiting for replacement parts from the Russian interior. Two large amphibious assault ships resting on the floor of the bay, taking with them the hope of reinforcing 900 assault troops. Most painful of all, the Evenkures, worth $100 million, burning Russia, possesses exactly two of these treasures, and the other is stranded in a distant sea, helplessly watching its twin perish. Adding the entire radar network blinded and the command headquarters brain dead indefinitely, the total damage to the Black Sea Fleet that night is conservatively estimated at $250 to $300 million. That morning, Crimean officials woke to a cold new reality: fewer radars, fewer warships, no remaining interceptor aircraft, and the complete loss of their air defense brain. As for Governor Razvajayev, the man who had been dancing and crowing the night before over the feat of shooting down 71 plywood drones, he now had nothing left to do but sink into a deeply unsettling silence. Bye for now. Bye for